Alright guys, so this is the first read through for our unit. Let's actually bring this up. Sorry guys. Okay, so this is our first read through for this document. So let's first actually go into the intro for Down at the Dinghy so that you get an understanding of what we will be reading. Okay, so it's by J.D. Salinger. Down at the Dinghy is. Short story. So the author, he's best known for his novel, The Catcher in the Rye. You guys should be familiar with that maybe. I did have that in my classroom library, so maybe you guys read it from there. But it's also a very popular book for high school students to read. And a lot of high schoolers actually do relate to it. So because it's a novel of teenage angst and rebellion published in 1951. And though it was published in 1951, it's still very relatable, I think, to a lot of teenagers today. So the author was born on January 1st, 1919 in New York, New York, to a Jewish father and a Scottish mother. Mixed marriages were frowned upon during this time period. He didn't learn about his Scottish heritage until he was a teenager. He failed out of school and ended up going to Valley Forge Military Academy in Wayne, Pennsylvania. He attended New York University for a year. However, school wasn't really his thing. He met Professor Whit Burnett while taking night classes at Columbia University, who pushed him to pursue writing. He was then drafted into the Army after the attacks on Pearl Harbor and served in the military from 1942 to 1944. He was on Utah Beach during the Normandy invasion and was a part of the Battle of the Bulge. Salinger did not escape the war without some trauma, and when it ended, he was hospitalized after suffering a nervous breakdown. While undergoing care, he met a woman named Sylvia, a German and possibly a former Nazi. The two married, but their union was a short one, just 8 months long. When Salinger returned to New York in 1946, he quickly set about resuming his life as a writer and soon found his work published in his favorite magazine, The New Yorker. He also continued to push on with the work on his novel. Finally, in 1951, The Catcher in the Rye was published. He married a second time in 1955 to Claire Douglas, the daughter of high-profile British art critic Robert Langdon Douglas. The couple was together for a little more than a decade and had 2 children together, Margaret and Matthew. So here's more information about him. I'm not going to read everything just because I want to save time so we can actually get into the first read through of Down at the Dinghy, but you guys have access to this. So let's get to actually the story itself. So 9 Stories by J.D. Salinger. That book is also in my classroom library, so you could have come across it as well. So that's where Down at the Dinghy is coming from. It was published in 1949 as a part of his book 9 Stories, a collection of 9 short stories written by Salinger after World War II. And those are the stories included. You'll see when we're reading Down at the Dinghy that part of the first page is the last paragraph of The Laughing Man. And usually we would read For Esme with Love and Squalor as well, but due to time reasons, we are just going to be reading Down at the Dinghy before you start your own short stories and literary analyses. So what is a dinghy? It's a fun word to say. It's a noun. It's a small boat for recreation or racing, especially an open boat with a mast and sails. So you'll see a picture of an example right there. So we're going into our first read through. So I want you guys to be looking and asking yourselves questions about these things here. Trying to understand the plot of the story, the setting, time and place of the action, the characters, the conflict or the conflicts, and ask questions for what you do not understand. So start thinking of the questions and feel free to write them down as well. Because writing down questions is a good way to start analyzing your story, and also when you find out answers, if you find out answers as you go along, you can go back to that question that you wrote down and was like, okay, so here's the answer, and this is what I assume the answer is from the text, and that can end up being your thesis. It can be something arguable. So we'll do the second read through tomorrow, so I'm not going to go through what we're doing for that, and then we'll also have a PowerPoint for the second read through just to go a little more in depth about it. So let's actually get into the first read through. Obviously, we're going to be having more than one video, but we have about 10 minutes left of this video, so let's bring it up. And we're just going to, for the first read through, we're just going to read it. We're not going to make any markings on this at all, and then tomorrow we will start marking it up and talking about what should be annotated and what you can look for when you are considering writing a literary analysis piece on this. Okay, so down at the dinghy. It was a little after 4 o'clock on an Indian summer afternoon. Some 15 or 20 times since noon, Sandra, the maid, had come away from the lakefront window in the kitchen with her mouth set tight. This time, as she came away, she absently untied and retied her apron strings, taking up what little slack her enormous waistline allowed. Then she went back to the enameled table and lowered her freshly uniformed body into the seat opposite Mrs. Snell. Mrs. Snell, having finished the cleaning and ironing, was having her customary cup of tea before walking down the road to the bus stop. Mrs. Snell had her hat on. It was the same interesting black felt headpiece she had worn, not just all summer, but for the past 3 summers. Through record heat waves, through change of life, over scores of ironing boards, over the helms of dozens of vacuum cleaners, the Hattie Carnegie label was still inside it, faded, but it might be said, unbowed. "I'm not going to worry about it," Sandra announced for the 5th or 6th time, addressing herself as much as Mrs. Snell. "I made up my mind. I'm not going to worry about it." "What for?" "That's right," said Mrs. Snell. "I wouldn't. I really wouldn't. Reach me my bag, dear." So, as we're going through this page, even though we're not really annotating today, I do want to make sure that you guys are coming through with at least the main points of this story. So, characters and setting for right now. So characters that we've been introduced to so far are Sandra, the maid, and if you've printed this off, please feel free to actually make these notes yourself so that you have that written down. And then Mrs. Snell. And then we also know that the setting is around 4 o'clock right at this moment of the story. And it's happening during an Indian summer, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with that term because Wisconsin's known for having sometimes Indian summers. It's usually when warmer weather, unseasonably warm weather happens, usually during the fall season, when it's super sunny and hot when it's supposed to be cooler, so unseasonably warm weather, really. So let's move on. A leather handbag, extremely worn, but with a label inside it as impressive as the one inside Mrs. Snell's hat, lay on the pantry. Sandra was able to reach it without standing up. She handed it across the table to Mrs. Snell, who opened it and took out a pack of mentholated cigarettes and a folder of Stork Club matches. Mrs. Snell lit a cigarette, then brought her teacup to her lips, but immediately set it down in its saucer. "If this don't hurry up and cool off, I'm going to miss my bus." She looked over at Sandra, who was staring oppressively in the general direction of the copper saucepans lined against the wall. "Stop worrying about it," Mrs. Snell ordered. What good's it going to do to worry about it? Either he tells her or he don't." That's all. What good's worrying gonna do? I'm not worrying about it, Sandra responded. The last thing I'm gonna do is worry about it. Only it drives you loony the way that kid goes pussyfooting all around the house. You can't hear him, you know. I mean, nobody can hear him, you know. Just the other day I was shelling beans right at this here table, and I almost stepped on his hand. He was sitting right under the table. Well, I wouldn't worry about it. I mean, you gotta weigh every word you say around him, Sandra said. It drives you loony. I still can't drink this, Mrs. Snell said. That's terrible, when you gotta weigh every word you say and all. It drives you loony. I mean it. Half the time I'm half loony. Sandra brushed some imaginary crumbs off her lap and snorted. A 4-year-old kid. He's kind of a good-looking kid, says Mrs. Snell. Them big brown eyes and all. Sandra snorted again. He's gonna have a nose just like the father. She raised her cup and drank from it without any difficulty. I don't know what they want to stay up here all October for, she said malcontently, lowering her cup. I mean, none of 'em even go anywhere near the water now. She don't go in, he don't go in, the kid don't go in. Nobody goes in now. They don't even take that crazy boat out no more. I don't know what they threw good money away on it for. I don't know how you can drink yours. I can't even drink mine. Sandra stared rancoorously at the opposite wall. I'll be so glad to get back of the city. I'm not foolin'. I hate this crazy place. She gave Mrs. Snell a hostile glance. It's all right for you. You live here all year round. You got your social life here and all. You don't care. I'm going to drink this if it kills me, Mrs. Snell said, looking at the clock over the electric stove. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Sandra asked abruptly. I mean, what would you do? Tell the truth. This was the sort of question Mrs. Snell slipped into as if it were an ermine coat. She at once let go her teacup. Well, in the first place, she said, I wouldn't worry about it. What I'd do, I'd look around for another. I'm not worried about it, Sandra interrupted. I know that, but what I'd do, I'd just get me. The swinging door opened from the dining room, and Boo Boo Tannenbaum, the lady of the house, came into the kitchen. She was a small, almost hipless girl of 25, with styleless, colorless, brittle hair pushed back behind her ears, which were very large. She was dressed in knee-length jeans, a black turtleneck pullover, and socks and loafers. Her joke of a name aside, her general unprettiness aside, she was, in terms of permanently memorable, immoderately perceptive, small area faces, a stunning and final girl. She went directly to the refrigerator and opened it. As she peered inside with her legs apart and her hands on her knees, she whistled, melodically, through her teeth, keeping time with a little uninhibited pendulum action of her rear end. Sandra and Mrs. Snell were silent. Mrs. Snell put out her cigarette unhurriedly. Sandra. Yes, ma'am. Sandra looked alertly past Mrs. Snell's hat. Aren't there any more pickles? I want to bring him a pickle. He ate 'em, Sandra reported intelligently. He ate 'em before he went to bed last night. There was only 2 left. Sorry, guys. There's only 2 left. Oh, well, I'll get some when I go to the station. I thought maybe I could lure him out of that boat. Boo Boo shut the refrigerator door and walked over to look out of the lakefront window. Do we need anything else, she asked from the window. Just bread. I left your check on the hall table, Mrs. Snell. Thank you. Okay, said Mrs. Snell. I hear Lionel's supposed to be running away. She gave a short laugh. Certainly looks that way, Boo Boo said, and slid her hands into her hip pockets. At least he don't run very far away, Mrs. Snell said, giving another short laugh. Let's add, while we're at it, the characters. So, Boo Boo, the lady of the house, and then Lionel, which I assume, or we can assume right now, is the little boy. At the window, Boo Boo changed her position slightly so that her back wasn't directly to the 2 women at the table. Okay, this video is about to end. I'm going to pause it here and then we can move on in the next video.